Welcome to Slash Forward. In this episode, we're going to take the rules and wipe our asses with them, presuming they're in some sort of paper format, as we watch the 1985 vampire classic, Fright Night. If you want to lose yourself in the seductive trappings of sensual dance performance, subscribe to the channel. Let's get to it. We open in a quiet neighborhood and pan around while taking in the sounds of sensual pleasure, which we see are emanating from the TV.
Your head on my breast.
But the camera continues its journey until we find Charlie and Amy playing some bed-adjacent love games. You know, I knew there was something going down in here. They're watching Fright Night, just like us. But Charlie ruins the mood by aggressively pushing Amy toward the next level. She's rightfully put off by this, but then immediately acquiesces. However, Charlie becomes distracted by the new neighbors, moving a sweet coffin into the basement next door. Charlie's downshift from rapey to disinterested pushes Amy beyond her tolerance, so she storms off. They play it cool in front of Miss Brewster, who just wants to make sure her boy Charlie's providing his gal with a sufficient quantity of pleasure. And in this way, she ends the evening for them. The next day, we have a brief scene at school to meet Charlie's primary friend-like school acquaintance, Evil Ed.
Well, that's the point to a pop quiz, Brewster, to surprise you.
And it's a lot to process. Then Charlie goes home where he meets his neighbor's new lady, paying respect to the game by splooging in his pants. Then he gets to studying trigonometry, but is eventually interrupted by a loud scream. He thinks little of this beyond moving to an environment he finds more conducive to studying. Somehow, Amy finds him here and seeks to make amends. I mean, he has so much to offer, why wouldn't she? But he again ignores her after seeing his fantasy lady on the news, which announces that she's been murdered. But Amy still has feelings which are being trod upon, so she gives him the old sloppy Joe, something usually reserved for the bedroom. His natural curiosity is piqued, but when he gets too close to the neighbor's house, the live-in carpenter Billy runs him off. So he's relegated to peeping casually from the comfort of his bedroom, which works out perfectly as he awakes at just the right moment to catch some action, and maybe learn a few things. The mood is ruined, however, when they awkwardly make eye contact. He rushes out to get a better vantage point from the bushes, but he forgot his spy gear long-range directional microphone. It's a moot point anyway because his mom comes out and announces his presence to the whole neighborhood. His neighbor then spots him and offers a gift, an apple eaten through the center, confirming that he is a psycho. No one believes his claims of vampiric activity, but Charlie resolves to at least tell the police about how he witnessed his neighbor's open window sexcapades, which is a weird flex. So he shows up with a detective, waltzes in like a big shot, and casts aspersions all over. It starts out okay, but Charlie goes in hard with the vampire talk, giving everyone a good laugh and resulting in his immediate dismissal by the officer. This also lays his cards out all over the table, so he runs to Evil's house for some advice on what to do to ensure his safety after his neighbor wakes up. He has little to offer other than a crucifix and the rule that vampires can't enter a house without permission from the owner, so he'd be safest to find a rental property. That evening, Miss Brewster calls him down to introduce him to Jerry Dandridge, their sexy new neighbor. Jer smooth talks her while Charlie acts like a little freak. Later that night, Charlie returns to his room and gets crept on by Jerry, who uses his preternatural strength to toss him around, demonstrating his power. He just wants to live with Billy in peace and eat women, so he offers Charlie the opportunity to let bygones be bygones, but instead, Charlie stabs him in the hand. This causes Jerry to phase into his other form just a little bit, showing off his fearsome teeth and tongue. But when Miss Brewster wakes up and calls out to Charlie, he backs off. For now, instead opting to go home and torment Charlie with lewd phone calls all night. Is it pink inside? The next day, Charlie seeks counsel with Mr. Fright Night himself, Peter Vincent. Unfortunately, he's in a sour mood from getting canceled, plus the show's all fake. Amy and Ed visit later and find he's taken on an entirely new aesthetic and scent profile, and is now obsessed with murder. They do manage to convince him to hold off on his murderous aspirations until they get a chance to try to find some help. But they also make the mistake of presuming Mr. Vincent has any inclination to help strangers. The difference here is that while Ed lurks around in the background, Amy offers to sign over a fat $500 savings bond in exchange for his assistance. Plus, all they want is for him to do a vampire test to convince Charlie that Jerry is human. They even check in with Jerry to arrange the conditions, and he's cool with it. The next day, they all arrive and are greeted warmly, especially Amy, which is disturbing. Jerry opens his throat up and knocks back the holy water like a pro, but its blessedness is unattested by Charlie, so he remains unconvinced. They work to usher him out as Vincent checks his makeup and notes a conspicuous absence of Jerry in the view. This leaves Jerry with some suspicions. As the lads walk Amy home, Ed splits off into an alley and then screams. Turns out this is just a classic Ed prank, leveraged to keep them at a distance, like he does with everyone else in his life. As he continues on, he's casually pursued into an intimate dead end. end, where Jerry opts to turn him rather than kill him. Then it's Amy and Charlie's turn, and they end up ducking through a windowsill salad station to escape in a crowded nightclub. Meanwhile, Ed pays a visit to Vincent, where he continues to be annoying, and on his very first night, he is scarified and driven off by a rank amateur, cementing his status as the absolute worst. Back at the club, Charlie tries to call someone who cares, and Jerry arrives and smolders his way across the dance floor. He makes Amy feel a little dangerous, and then engages in an ages-old seduction ritual of a teenager, which includes guiding her hand to that cake. Charlie tries to cut in, but can't even manage to punch the air behind Jerry's ear. Jerry commands him to retrieve Vincent and bring him to the house before dipping out. But along the way, he's forced to demonstrate his power once again on poor Leon this time, and he nearly loses Amy in the crowd, but manages to regain his young prize. Charlie heads to Vincent's house to try to convince him to help save Amy, but his heart is filled with fear and he gives him a hard pass. Meanwhile, Amy wakes up on Jerry's bearskin, classic, and he lets her know it's time to experience what being a vampire is all about. She's ready and she offers herself to him, so he gets in there. Soon Charlie shows up and lurks around outside, where he finds Vincent's had a change of heart, having arrived with his monster box. They consider sneaking in through the back, but the front door beckons them. They venture in and are greeted by Jerry, who tries to get hit.
For real.
Word. We learn there's some ambiguous rule about faith here, as he crushes one crucifix but cowers from the other. Before they can ask any follow-up questions for next time, his roommate steps in and pleases his master through violence. Vincent runs next door to check on Miss Brewster, but finds Ed being annoying again. He comes out of the room a wolf, somehow, and Vincent calls upon the knowledge of Atreyu to see him through this altercation, backflipping his way into a victory, and then sticking around to gawk a little at how it plays out. Jerry tosses Charlie into Amy's room with a stake, so he can either kill his girlfriend, or the newest harpy can enjoy her first meal. But Vincent runs over with his rudimentary stabbing device and breaks in. Seeing how far gone she is, they realize she can only be freed by killing the master. As they go out to pursue this, Billy pulls up hard, like Peter Vincent's not gonna push his wig back, but he comes right back because he's a zombie or something. Luckily, they manage to pop him open and discover his weakness to be uncontrollable dissipation into a puddle of goo. For some reason. They have a little cat and mouse chase with Jerry, who destroys his stained glass feature, which is really a shame. And then Vincent finds his faith, enabling him to hold Jerry back long enough for the clocks to strike sunrise, causing Jerry to make one last go of it before being forced back to his casket. He's now presumably vulnerable in his basement with no more defense. Vincent searches for him while Amy confronts Charlie, who struggles as he tries to decide if this is working for him or not. And it's a tough call. Vincent then breaks into the casket but bones it by stabbing Jerry's armpit, but then Charlie's struck by an idea and they start breaking windows, all 50 of them, to let in all that natural sunlight basements are known for. And in defiance of how light works, Jerry hangs in there until a direct stream of light blasts him back, turning his ass into grass, my friend. In the aftermath, we see that Vincent got his show back, the ratings having recovered after the lore was repopularized by the real-life vampire incident no one else knew about. Charlie and Amy make up and are back to finding satisfaction in the simple intimacy of necking, only occasionally experimenting with sensually feeding each other their own blood. Just a heads up that I have a website where you can support the channel through donations or merch, and I'd like to take a moment to give a huge thanks to my donors memorialized in the Hall of Headshots. Fright Night is a highly regarded classic, and I think it works pretty well, but it definitely suffers from the classic 80s excess of scenes that seem to be crammed in for no other reason than they're maybe cool to look at, but don't necessarily fit the rules set for the cinematic universe. If you enjoyed the video, I'd love for you to become part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.